Hello, I'm excited to be able to present to you today on interviewing skills for pre-professional students. Although we're not meeting in person, there is an advantage to having this be a virtual presentation because I know many of you will not have an actual interview until either late this upcoming summer or fall or perhaps sometime in the future. So you'll be able to revisit this presentation whenever it makes sense for you. My name is Raven Ortolan-Wiesman, and I am a career advisor. I work in the John P. Behe Career Center, which is over in the Harper Building on Creighton's campus. And certainly, if you have questions about any of the materials I'm talking today, I'd encourage you either to visit our website, which is at creighton.edu/career center, or of course, you can also schedule with us via Handshake. Most of you should already have a Handshake account, and you can schedule an appointment with us that way, or you can call our front desk at 402-280-2722 with any of the appointment scheduling questions. When we're thinking of an interview, oftentimes it's easy for us to think of the fact that we are going to be in the spotlight, but we forget that there's also a really other critical component. We are also trying to assess whether that school, that program is going to be a good fit for us. For example, if we're someone who's worried about burnout, we want to make sure they have a really good wellness program, whatever we need to be successful. So the interview, even though, yes, we are in the spotlight, it is a two-way conversation. So there should be give and take throughout the interview. While an interview does require practice and preparation, you will get better with time, and an interview will not be perfect. No interview is perfect, there's no such thing. So don't aim for perfection, but aim for authentic seeming of confidence in the interview, and then understand what your motivations are. And that's really going to be key pieces to help you be successful in this process. When we think about what we're doing before the interview, before we show up on the interview day, we want to make sure that we're ready to go. Some of the things I would recommend doing would be looking at your social media sites, making sure that either they are set to private or that you would be completely comfortable with someone from admissions reviewing them, because absolutely that may happen. Of course, make sure that your voice message accounts can accept new messages, that your voice message system sounds professional and up to date. And then we're going to be doing some research not only of ourselves, but also of the different schools and making sure that we have some idea of what the profession is looking for so we can anticipate questions. When we're thinking about ways to research ourselves, many of you heard the personal statement presentation that I gave a few weeks ago, and some of this would be similar. So if we're thinking about ways that we are connecting to the profession, it can be helpful to think about what types of skills or qualities do we want to display in this interview, and think about that in advance of showing up on that interview day, and then connect those different qualities that you may want in yourself. So it could be compassion, it could be leadership, it could be creative problem solving, etc. Connect those skills and attributes to some specific stories, because we can anticipate that we're going to have questions in which we need to relay stories to show our different behavior, motivations, qualities, etc. So we're going to be brainstorming some of those pieces in advance. Helpful, of course, to think of some of our strengths, some of our weaknesses. If you're feeling lost in this place right away, it's maybe helpful to take an inventory. Of course, there are unofficial inventories like we've listed here, so you could do an exhaustive list of illustrations of your patient care ability, whether you volunteered or whether you've shadowed or whether you've actually had clinical experience, professional experiences. Not only are we listing, but perhaps connecting also to some specific examples that could help illustrate some skills we used in those different areas. We're also thinking about activities that we've had on campus, off campus, hobbies, how we traveled abroad. What have we learned? Where have been our areas of growth? What are we really proud of that we've accomplished? Because of course, patient care, healthcare is a big part of applying to professional school, but it's not the only thing. You do want to have a holistic record, right? We think of, yes, care of personnel is care of the whole person, but here I'm thinking of like, what of my experiences outside of healthcare have also illustrated the kind of person I am. And then another really critical piece of this is thinking about our different service experiences, and yes, connected to healthcare, but also unconnected to healthcare. What can we say that we've done with our time when we're not in school, when we're not in school organizations? What does our community engagement or involvement look like? So that's, of course, one piece, is to do these informal inventories where we're writing down different things that we've done. I mean, we're preparing for the MCAS, so this shouldn't be brand new, and we might be referring to our MCAS when we're preparing for our interviews. But the other piece that you could do if you're feeling like you're stuck here is to take an official inventory, like the Clifton Strengths for Student Assessment or the 16 Personalities inventory. You can see a lot of these different assessments from the Creighton Career Center website. If you look under career exploration, we do have an assessments tab. You can take a lot of different assessments on our website for free. You can even meet with an advisor to talk through what those strengths mean that you have and how do you connect it to daily life. So step one, we're going to do some self-research. We can also anticipate some of the common questions that we're going to receive. For example, a very common question is, tell me about yourself. Now, if we know that we're going to get a question, it can be helpful to think, what are they looking for in an answer? So with tell me about yourself, if we're thinking about what admissions is trying to glean from this, they're probably trying to determine how articulate we are and also how self-aware are we, because we need to be self-aware when we're in these professional schools. We're about to join a very long commitment, a very long professional commitment. And then also, does our background connect with our interest in this profession? So if they're asking me to tell them about myself, and I've given them an illustration of my love of dogs, of surfing, of puzzling, but I've never bringing it back to dentistry, for example, then I'm not really making a good case that dentistry is a part of who I am or who I want to be. So I'm not saying you shouldn't bring up anything that's unrelated to your interest in the profession, but certainly do also answer why this profession, or at least like how you've shown that interest in your involvement. We'll talk more about tell me about yourself in a second. Another very common question that I know that you're all anticipating is, why do you want to be a doctor, physical therapist, pharmacist, etc.? When we think about what are some of the things they're looking for here, is your answer easy to follow? Again, are you able to articulate why you're interested? Could this answer be used for another profession? Like, do you have enough of a sound idea of what this profession entails that you would be clearly a better fit for this profession than something else? So occupational therapist versus physical therapist, have you given me enough to understand why OT versus PT? And then does your answer seem genuine? Like, is it connected back to personality pieces from you, back to your experiences, or does it seem like generic and cookie cutter? And then they'll probably ask a question like this in some way. It may look a little bit different, but something to the effect of, how will you handle the challenges of professional school? If they're asking you something like that, it makes sense that some of the agenda behind that question would be, do you know what you're getting into? As we've already stated, this is a number of years, a lot of money, a lot of time. Do you know what it's going to be like? And are you ready not only for schooling, but then for the profession that comes afterwards? Can you show a track record of success? Can you show that you're probably going to be successful in this very difficult professional school setting? And then what are your coping mechanisms? So knowing that you're going to have a big challenge in front of you, do you have a support network? Or do you have a history of practicing wellness? Are you aware enough of your own study strategies and what you need to seek out materials and resources to be successful when you're in a stressful environment? So what we're doing here, when we're thinking about these questions, we're thinking about, well, what are they probably looking for when they ask these questions? This is a good exercise even when you're in the interview. So if you're ever asked a question that, I don't know what my initial response is, think about, why are they asking that question? For example, if they were asking me, what is a book you read recently? And my gut response is, well, I don't read. Well, you probably do read, right? You read at least textbooks, but think about, why are they asking that question? And if they're asking you why you read, or what books you've read recently, or what's your favorite book, part of it is they want to get to know you, but they may also be interested in, is this someone who is going to be proactive? Are you someone who's an active learner? So could you answer that question even if you aren't someone who likes to read for leisure, for example? Perhaps you're talking about articles you've read recently, or how you like to stay informed with the profession. So don't let a question throw you off so quickly. Think about, why are they asking me that question? What are they potentially looking for? And that can often help you develop an answer. With the Tell Me About Yourself, this is a graphic from The Balance, who writes a really great article, not only about how to tell me, or the Tell Me About Yourself question, about various other questions as well, but here they suggest having 3 different arcs in this answer. So we're trying to talk a little bit about where we are now, and I would say related to the school that you're getting into, or that you're applying for. Discuss how you got to where you are and share your goals for the future. It looks like the goals for the future got cut off a little bit, but that's okay. We understand that that's what it's saying. So I don't think I have an example here for you, but if I'm answering this question, I have approximately 40 seconds to 2 minutes or so to give them an answer. And I don't want to sound cookie cutter. I don't need to say that my name is Raven. They already know what my name is. So I might say, that I'm originally from Wisconsin, but I'm probably not going to go into too much detail about my family because that's not exactly what they're asking for. And also it's very common. So I probably want to be a little bit more interesting in the way that I formulate my answer to this question. So if I'm talking about where I am now, I might be responding with some of the things that motivate me to do the type of work that I'm doing. So if I'm someone who's really interested in giving back to the community and I really enjoy helping those who are from underserved populations, I might talk about, currently I'm volunteering at the Anna Francis House and I'm working part-time as a patient transporter for University of Nebraska Medical Center because this is another interest area that I have. Discussing how I got to where I am, I might be giving them some background because maybe I was originally interested in becoming a forensic scientist, and after a lot of self-introspection, after a lot of shadowing, I've realized that I really want the human connection. And so a lot of what I've been doing, like the patient transporting, has been getting myself hands-on patient experience and finding a way to merge my interest for science that I still have with caring for people in a hands-on way. And my hope is to become, a doctor or to practice medicine, to continue to serve underserved populations in more of a leadership capacity, which is why I'm pursuing medical school or something to that effect. Now, this is very improvisational, so it would be more sound than what I just gave you, and yet that would be potentially a way to talk about that tell me about yourself question and hit different points to help the listener understand why you're sitting in that chair in front of them. Some additional questions that we can anticipate would be what makes you unique, or why would you be a good applicant for this particular professional school? They may ask you about your patient experiences. It could be talking about meaningful times. It could be talking about challenges you've had, or just in general, what type of experiences you've had that prepared you for medical school. It's also relatively common to ask about connections between your different score on your preliminary test and how that connects to your future academic ability. And then also they may be asking you about, well, what will you do if you don't get into medical school this year? Now, as far as looking at tests and whether that's a good indication of your academic ability, if you're uncertain about this piece, or if you feel like you've gotten a D or a C or something like that in your freshman year and you're uncertain how much or how little to talk about it, those are really good reasons to come in to the Career Center and talk with a career advisor and just talk through, because every situation is unique. So it's hard to give a specific answer to everyone saying like, this is what you should say. But I will say it depends. If you're curious, feel like maybe your situation is unique, good reason to come into the Career Center. For the what will you do if you don't get into professional school this year? I mean, basically, if they're asking that question, they just want to see if you're committed to try again. So looking at how you could improve your record, whether you're self-aware enough to understand where you may have deficiencies in your application and if you would try again. So that would be my one big suggestion there, is to not say, oh, I do something else entirely, but talk about how you'd be active in trying to reapply. A lot of the different questions they're going to ask us are behavioral questions. That means they'll say something like, tell me about a time you experienced conflict, or give me an instance of a time that you had a challenging patient, or something like that. Often starting with tell me about a time or give an example of. Now, our response to that is usually going to be some sort of story that illustrates our behavior in that situation. The STAR method is a really good way to frame stories. The good news is you're already probably doing this in a lot of the stories you tell. So if you were going to a social function, you're trying to relate to a friend, interesting incident from the other day, you're typically going to give them the situation, provide the context. So, I can't understand what the importance of the story is without understanding where the story took place or what are some of the critical foundations to that story. So I lead with the situation. And then I'm going to talk about my task. So I'm about to tell you why the action happened. This was the problem or the challenge, which the story is going to hinge on. And then A, action. And this is where I'm spending the most time is talking about what I did. And I would say for a professional school interview, really important to use I language, not we language. So if I was talking about a team event and we as a team had to try to help a group member out, I still want to make sure I'm using some language that's I specific because the admissions person wants to know what you did, not what the collective did. And then the R would be the result. And that's really where we're going to be spending, or like not spending a lot of time, but really want to make sure that we leave on some sort of note. I'm not saying it has to be like, and everything was perfect, but I want to know what the resolution was. Some additional things that you can do when you're tasked with these questions is listen to the question, of course. If you haven't already have an event in mind, you can spend about 5 to 8 seconds or so to try to prepare or plan. It's always okay to ask the admissions person or the interviewer, can I take a moment to prepare? You don't want to ask that of too many questions. I would say like no more than maybe 2 or so. Probably in the interview, am I going to really ask for, can I take a moment to prepare? But that is absolutely something you have at your ready. And of course, if you're still uncertain, think about why are they asking you that question? If you can't give them an exact response, like if they're asking you, what is your biggest failure? And you're like, I really don't feel like I have like a big failure. They're probably asking you that because they want to know how you cope with failure. Well, can you give them anything about a time that you incorporated or you experienced failure, but just on a smaller level? You may acknowledge that in your answer, like, biggest failure, that's hard. But there was a time that I failed and then X, Y, Z. So it's okay to give them something close if you can't give them 100% what they're asking for. So when we're thinking of preparing for the interview, we can anticipate some questions, but we definitely don't know everything that they're going to throw our way. So we recommend preparing 5 to 10 stories that show a variety of different experiences. So we're thinking about times that are involved with patients, service, times that we're doing problem solving, working with others, handling conflict, managing stress, taking leadership. If I'm thinking about what makes a good doctor and what are some challenges that a doctor can anticipate, then that's going to help me prepare for a medical school interview because I'm thinking of stories that would relay that I'm able to be strong in these areas or that I'm able to overcome some challenges. And then, of course, thinking about the STAR method for those different stories is helpful as well. Like, where is the situation? What's my task for the story? What was my action? What was the result? And you do not need to memorize your stories, but have enough familiarity with them that you would at least be able to bring up the main points in a conversation. So other things that we can use to anticipate some questions is think about, are there new trends or technologies in the field? Like, of course, if I'm going to interview for a medical school interview, if I was doing it right now, COVID-19 is probably going to come up, right? Because I'm making this presentation in March 2020, and so that is a really big topic right now. So anticipate that potentially could become part of your conversation. Also, what challenges do you anticipate in this role? It could be like, what does any professional anticipate as a challenge in this role? Like, burnout or not enough time with patients or, insurance covering physical therapy, etc. But also what challenges do I uniquely feel like I may have in this role? Think about what types of skills, of course, help people thrive, what strengths would be really helpful in this position, and then also what are the current pain points facing medicine in your area, right? Because if these are all important pieces, they're probably going to ask questions that in some way connect to these different points. And then when we're getting ready for the school and we know that we have like a particular interview in front of us, we really need to research that school, that curriculum, that program, and think about, why is this program unique to me? Like, why do I want to attend this school over another school? And even if it's not our first choice, we're still asking that question, right? Like, what are my reasons for wanting and being interested to attend this school? Do they have unique elements? Are there particular programs or professional development opportunities, wellness curriculum? Do they, have community engagement at a particular level? Look and see if you know anything about the faculty, or if you can do some research on the faculty. Are there particular faculty members you'd want to do research with or that you're interested in connecting with, et cetera, et cetera. Now, know that we have Cretonians all over the place. So there might well be someone from Creighton who's attended that medical school. So you can absolutely connect with the Career Center. We can show you some resources to help you find different alumni. It may be a little bit tricky to find specifically if they went to that school, but we have some good resources to start you on that search path, because it would be lovely if you could talk to someone who's either attending now or who has attended, because they're going to know better than anyone what the school does well and what you may want to bring up in an interview. All right, so we've prepared in advance of the interview, but let's talk about some of the things we want to do on that interview day. So we know that there's going to be a lot of different things on the schedule. It's not just going to be an interview, it's probably also going to be a presentation, a lunch, maybe a dinner, perhaps a tour. We want to make sure we're staying professional throughout the entire day. And of course, while we're not going to be on our phones during the interview, they're absolutely going to be off and out of sight. But also we don't want to be on our phone a lot outside of the interview. So if we're on our phone all the time during the tour, if we're not being present, that's not going to look good to us. Attend everything on the interview schedule. If you're not able to, please do contact the program administrator or whoever is communicating the schedule and be very apologetic. It just doesn't show that you're very interested if you don't go to everything on the schedule. Of course, things come up. Sometimes you can't, but do try to attend everything. And then know your logistics. If you're able to go to that site in advance, that's not always possible for us traveling, but at least do some sort of Google mapping or something similar so you can anticipate how long it's going to take you there. I would say plan to arrive early, around 15 minutes early. If you arrive earlier than that, just wait until it's closer to the 15-minute mark to actually go in. And then we want to have our materials ready. So oftentimes we'll have a portfolio. I call it a padfolio here, but that faux leather folder that you can keep resumes in, and also a pad of paper to take notes. Have extra copies of your resume, have a pen to write things down. It's okay to have your questions for the interviewer written down, and don't worry, we'll have a slide about questions later on. What I would say is that as far as resumes are concerned, we don't know yet whether you have an open or closed file interview, which means if it's open, they already have access to your MCAS and they probably know a lot about you already. If it's closed, they don't have any of that information. If it's a closed file interview, it's likely they don't want your resume because it's supposed to be blind. But if it's open, they're going to be more open to having that information. So I would have it with you, and then when it makes sense in the conversation. So perhaps if you're talking about something that's on your resume, you can bring up that you have extra copies of your resume. Would it be helpful to share that out? And then they can let you know whether or not that would make sense. And my last piece of advice here is just to look sharp but be comfortable. I sometimes have students say that they are trying on brand new shoes that day, or they're trying out a brand new haircut they got the day before. Give yourself time to break in your new outfit. Give yourself time to break in the new haircut. You want to be comfortable. Many of us aren't going to be comfortable if, for example, the haircut's not our style. And now it's the first day that we have it. So give your hair time to grow out. Give your shoes time to wear in. We're going to be business professional when we're going to our professional school interviews. And so here we have some examples. We're going to be more of the matching suit, and we're probably going to be wearing a more conservative color. So even the business professional people here who are not wearing jackets, I'd say that's a little bit too casual for the professional school interview. That would be more appropriate for going to dinner the night before. I would do more of the business professional without jackets. Business casual works as well, but we're really going to try to be at a higher level for the duration of our interview day. And so here we just have some additional pointers, and these slides will also be posted on Blue Line. So if you want to spend more time looking over them, absolutely you can. Women, of course, don't have to wear a skirt, but if you do wear a skirt, it should be conservative, meaning that it should be longer in length to your knees, I would say, or at least not too high above the knee if you're going to wear a skirt. You do not need to wear hosiery, which the slides say. Feel free to not. Just more, I want you to be comfortable in your own skin. I would recommend, though, regardless male or female, not to wear perfume or cologne, or if you're wearing it, wear a very minimal amount, because you may be in a closed room and some people have scent allergies or sensitivity. You wouldn't want to bother them, but of course do make sure that you have body deodorant on, that your suit is pressed, because if you're going to many interviews, that suit is going to start carrying your smell with you. So we have was it J cleaners on campus, but certainly you can take your suit to a dry cleaners and make sure you're doing that in advance of every interview. And then too, sometimes I see people who are, have a brand new jacket, haven't cut the string that sometimes ties in the very back of it. That is meant to be cut. So here we have arrows showing you, just make sure that this is cut on your suit. Sometimes skirts have these too. So that's a really big indicator that you are wearing it for the first time. It's just going to look a little silly if you have it. It's not saying like they won't let you into the school if you interview with a thread in your jacket, but try to save you embarrassment telling you that this is going to be on a lot of new jackets. Make sure you cut that. In addition to what we're wearing, a lot of what we're doing, like the presentation we give ourselves in these interviews, is going to be our nonverbals. And so there's this is from, I think it's from the Balance as well, but based on some studies, that 55% of the impression that people are making of us is based on the way that we dress, the way that we hold ourselves, the way that we walk. About 40% is the actual quality of our voice, whether we're using the correct grammar and the confidence that we're displaying. Then only 7% of the words that we choose to say. So with that being said, we've already talked a bit about what we're wearing, but some of the other things we can think about in that interview is that we really want to make eye contact. That's going to be important. We want to make sure that we're smiling. We don't have to have a rictus plastered on our face, but showing that we're comfortable at least smiling when we're doing the introductions, smiling periodically throughout the interview, smiling at the closing. We want to have good posture. So that means sitting upright in that chair. We're not crossing our legs. We're not going to do a lot of crossed arms. We're going to be present. We're going to try to reduce fidgets. And that, know what makes you fidget. So if you know that you're going to fidget if you have your hair down, or if you know you're going to fidget if you wear a watch, don't wear that watch, put your hair up. Having a strong handshake is important, of course. Again, I'm making this in March 2020, not the time to practice handshakes, but in general, you should practice your handshake, right? You should have a strong handshake. It should be palm to palm. I feel like I'm about to make a shadow creature, but palm to palm, strong handshake. Okay, that was terrible. I'm sorry, I can't show you via the webcam, but do practice. Of course, the Career Center would be happy to help you practice. Yeah, don't touch your face. If you cross your arms, it might just be because you're really cold, but if you're doing it and it's not a cold room, it just shows, it seems that you're standoffish. And we also don't want to use too many hand gestures, which I tend to do. So that is definitely an area I need to work on when I'm presenting. Let's see. The impressions they have here about clothing is a little bit more connected to industry, not medical school. We are not going to be necessarily fashionable or trendy in this medical school. We are not wearing brightly colored clothing. We are going to be conservative. We're going to be a little bit boring, but professional. So we know that nonverbals play a big piece, but also thinking about verbal communication basics. Helpful to use the name of the interviewer. It helps establish a connection. Watch how fast you talk. It might be that you talk too quickly or too slowly. If you're uncertain, having a mock interview can be a good way to get a baseline. We also want to make sure that our volume is at a good pitch. I've met with some students who have very loud volume, and I know that everybody in the offices next to me can hear them. I've also worked with students who are very, very quiet, and it's hard to understand what they're saying. So we don't want the interviewer to have to back up or to lean in. Helpful if you're aware of your verbal pauses. A lot of us have them. Is common. I also hear a lot of you knows or likes or kind ofs. Whatever it may be, we're going to try to reduce that between now and when we're giving the actual interview. Coming into the Career Center, another great reason to identify if you have verbal pauses and what they are. Easier now to do this now than to do it, 2 days before the interview. Of course, we're going to try to be clear, concise, and articulate. Using the STAR method will help us. And yes, answers should have a clear direction. If you're feeling like you don't know where to end, it can sometimes be helpful to end with the question. By that, I only mean if they'd ask you, tell me about a time you used creative problem solving, and now you're not sure how to end the answer because of where the story went, you can say, and that's a time I used creative problem solving. You're always welcome to ask, did that answer your question as well? But that's just a quick tip if you're feeling like, how do I end this? You can answer or end it with the stating the question they gave you at the beginning. And we do want to vary the length of answers. Don't be overly concerned with this, but just saying in general, answers are going to be between 40 seconds to 2 minutes in length. You can always time yourself to kind of get a sense for what your normal is. And then just some additional tips. When you're giving stories, try to be specific and give examples. So if you're saying like, you're someone who really values leadership, follow that up with an example of a time that you illustrated leadership, and let me be in that story a little bit, paint a picture for me. If you can think of times you've had hands-on experience, whether it's healthcare or otherwise, it's always going to be more helpful, valuable than anecdotal. When you can use a variety of action verbs and adjectives to describe experiences. So if I'm saying everything is great, that's really awesome, that's great. I'm not coming across as my most intelligent self, so do try to use a variety of different verbs. Of course, we want to avoid cliches, and if this was a presentation with a room full of people, I would say raise your hands if you want to help someone, and you would all raise your hands. So when we're thinking about things we're saying, that might be an example. I can say I want to help people, but I do need to at least address or add additional context so they understand how I want to help people. We also want to avoid implying doubt, which is very Midwestern of us, but trying not to say, I guess this is why I'm interested in this, or I don't know much about this area, or I suppose this is why I did it. We're trying to minimize those, of course, and we want to sell yourself. And so hopefully the research that we did, like the self-introspection we did prior to the interview, we have an understanding of the strengths we're building, and we're not going to leave that interview without at least giving them some of those reasons that we think we would be good in this particular profession. Some just additional skills that communication skills someone in the room might be looking for, like when they're in this interview, whether you're able to listen to the question and understand what it is, that you show at least a moderate degree of confidence, right? So we're not like crouched in, we look like we're ready there, that we're supposed to be there. We're being respectful, we're being compassionate, and we're, brevity. So we're looking like you're not going over that 2-minute mark, and that we're aware of our nonverbals. Remember to be yourself. Of course, this is going to be really important, and it can be hard. You're having to ingest a lot of information right now, but I want you to be the most professional version of you. Ultimately, interviews should be a conversation. Most of the time in professional schools, that's the feedback we get to hear, that they are quite conversational. You do not need to have rehearsed answers. And in fact, if you do have rehearsed answers, it's going to feel like you're more of a robot, which isn't going to come across well in a conversation. Answer honestly, not what you think they want to hear. Of course, don't give them red flags. So if you are really squeamish with blood, that's probably not what I would lead with. It's also like if you were going into medicine, why are you going into medicine if you're squeamish? But right, like we're going to be cognizant of being honest, but we don't need to overshare. Think on your feet. Always think about, why are they asking me that question? Be creative with how you respond. And of course, have some time practicing out loud. The last thing is that we know that they're going to be asking us, what questions do you have for us? And do prepare some. Think about what those questions say about you. So if I was only going to be asking about benefits or about days off, that doesn't look very good on me. If I'm asking more about professional development opportunities, what their wellness program looks like, how do students in their first year build camaraderie, why were you interested in this school? Those are types of things that say really positive things about me. So spend some time, like maybe drafting a list of questions that you're interested in asking. Know that you're probably going to prepare more than you ask. You might be asking only 2, kind of depending on time and what your feel for the situation is. And you want to have more ready just in case. And also know what the next step in the application process is. Like, it's okay to ask, like, what is the next steps? Like, when would I expect to hear back? That's going to help you in your stress management. So it'd be nice if you had that understanding before you left the interview of what the next steps were. And then lastly, that they're going to go off and make a decision. Now, I have some people ask me, like, do I really need to write a thank you note? Like, is that going to be the deciding factor? And I will say that it does help give them an impression of who you are as a candidate. So I would say it does make sense to send a letter thanking them for their time. And probably you are gracious of their time, so it's nice to express that gratitude. This is just a chart that shows whether you should send an email or a note. And typically the more formal the interview, the more formal the event, the more likely you're going to write a note. So it would be recommended to send them a handwritten note. Send it perhaps to the admissions office if you don't know what the contact information is, and you can always send multiple cards to the admissions office at once and just have one big address. If you really don't feel like you know how to address it to them, it's still okay to send an email. An email's still better than no thank you at all. Usually easier to find their email addresses. So for those of you who you don't have any questions about CASPER interviews, you don't have any questions about MMIs, you can leave now. I am going to talk briefly about both the CASPER interviews and then also about MMIs, because some people on the professional school track will encounter these. So what is CASPER? It stands for Computer-Based Assessments for Sampling Personal Characteristics. It's becoming more common, but only a minority of schools use it. It's hard to assess whether it's going to become much bigger than it currently is. When it is required, it's going to be alongside the admissions interviews and the letters of rec and the essay. So it's another assessment that you're going to take along the way. It's supposed to evaluate your key personal characteristics and be a reliable measure of traits like professionalism, ethics, communication, and empathy. There's debate about how well it does that, but that is its intent, its purpose. And so this data is a little bit old, but as of 2018, there's 31 allopathic schools using CASPER. As far as what it looks like, it's a 90-minute test. There are 12 sections of video and word-based scenarios. Each scenario has 3 follow-up questions, and they have to be answered in under 5 minutes. You can, if you want, take a break 15 minutes through, or sorry, a 15-minute break halfway through. There are a number of different places you can take sample tests. I've listed one here, and I have more in the resources at the end of this presentation. So there are sample videos that you can look up online. It's difficult in this presentation for me to show you a sample video, but they're on YouTube. And again, I will link to a place in my resources section at the end of this presentation so you can find resources to look at the video. But here's a sample word-based question. From time to time, we are all faced with conflict in some form. With experience, we learn to deal with different forms of conflict. First question, describe a time when you had to deal with conflict and how you coped with it. So you'd have 5 minutes to deal with this question. And then, how might you handle a similar situation differently should it arise again? And you would have 5 minutes. And then what would be your strategy if you were faced with a conflict that cannot be resolved? And then you would have 5 minutes. Right? So we're having some time to think about a question. You can see it's not very difficult, really. We have some strategies for how to think about some of these things. So for example, many of what you're going to encounter in these scenarios are ethical situations or ethical scenarios. When you're faced with those, and this is true of questions they would ask you in a regular interview, this is true of when we talk next about the multiple mini interviews, use if-then conditional statements when you're talking about an ethical scenario. So if Sue didn't correct her actions over the next few meetings, I would inform the professor about the situation and ask for his or her guidance. It's going to be helpful if you're using more of that tentative conditional statements, because we don't have all the information, and a lot of what they're asking for in these ethical scenarios is your ability to process information. The reviewer is much more interested in your thought process than what the actual answer is at the end of the day. So can you show what it's like to take the information you have, identify the information that you may need to make a more concrete decision, and understand what the potential ramifications are for various actions that you could take. As far as the CASPER, they say be prepared to share personal stories, and when you're doing that, focus on the lessons learned. That's actually a good rule when you're doing general interviewing, is think about what are my takeaways from this story. And then avoid red flags is also no matter where you are in the interview, avoid red flags. So for example, probably not going to talk about stories where I'm detailing anxiety or my inability to handle stress, right? So I'm going to, it's okay to be vulnerable, and yet I don't want to start digging a hole for myself that's hard to dig out of. I don't have a lot on the CASPER, in part because there are so many fantastic resources at the end of it. Again, it's usually going to be pretty quick, less than 5-minute responses. We want to be open, we want to be perspective taking, and we want to be thinking through multiple different scenarios, or like how we would approach different scenarios. Multiple mini interviews, these, when we have them, they're 6 to 8 mini interviews typically. Each interview is conducted by a different member of the admissions team. It could be faculty, students, community members, or staff, depending on how that looks. Usually you're given a written vignette discussing a problem or an ethical dilemma. You're given 2 minutes to read and think about that, and then 4 to 8 minutes spent discussing that situation portrayed in the vignette. Every station is going to have a different scenario, and it's not always a discussion, but I'll give you a slide later to say what some of those other scenarios could look like. Some of them might include debates, it could be active scenarios, it could be group problems. So while discussions are the most common, it could look otherwise. When they're looking at what MMIs are trying to identify in its applicants, they're usually looking at social and communication competence, critical thinking, sensitivity, humanism, critical thinking, etc. I said critical thinking twice. That's okay. It's towards the end of the presentation, so I'm getting a little tired. This is from the University of Minnesota, but they had this really great slide that just gives you kind of a brief understanding of what that circuit could look like. So you're going to be like, let's say you're applicant A, you're going to start at station 1, you're going to have 2 minutes to look at the vignette, you're going to go into the room, discuss it for however many minutes that school has allotted, and then you're going to go to station 2. You're going to have 2 minutes to look at the vignette, you're going to go inside, discuss whatever that vignette was, going to come back out, you're going to go to station 3. The hope is that these multiple mini interviews are reducing bias because you're seeing multiple different admissions teams, you're faced with different types of questions, and everyone's going to be evaluating you separately, and so it's supposed to be more of a holistic review. The logic would be that if I have a particular bias towards a type of person and I meet with them, I'm naturally always going to score those types of people higher if I'm meeting with them one-on-one. So this is meant to be a help for you. So some people might feel anxiety with the multiple mini interview, but it is meant to be more of a help for you than a hurt for you. And it's understood that you're likely not going to excel at every station that you meet. So it's kind of designed that you're going to naturally do better in some than in others. So keep that in mind if you have an MMI in front of you and this is stressing you out. And then this is kind of going into further detail. Discussion is the most common, is usually an applicant and an assessor, but there could be a collaboration. So there might be an applicant, and then there's going to be an observer and a rater in the room. It could be acting, where there is an applicant and an actor, and then there's an observer in the room. It could be debate, applicant and an observer in the room. This is an example of a discussion, what a discussion prompt could look like. Universities are commonly faced with the complicated task of balancing the educational needs of their students and the costs required to provide learning resources to a larger number of individuals. As a result of this tension, there has been much debate regarding the optimal size of classes. One side argues that smaller classes provides a more educationally effective setting for students, while others argue that it makes no difference, so larger classes should be used to minimize the number of instructors required. Discuss your opinion on this issue with the examiner. So let's say that we have 6 minutes to discuss this. I've already have 2 minutes before that I'm able to make notes. And I'm probably going to make notes on what I think the key issues are at hand and think about the pros and cons, or like the multiple variables that I would want to consider. And also thinking about, is there information I don't have? Like, is there information I wish I did have in order to make this decision? Depends on the school. Some schools are going to have you talk as long as you can talk, and then that's it. And it's not really a discussion, it's more just you talking. More commonly, you'll talk and kind of give your opening statement, and then the interviewer, observer, whatever they want to call themselves, will then be asking you some questions. They may try to poke holes in what you're saying, which, don't just bend over right away if someone pokes holes in it, but do listen and think like, well, do I still have the same stance and why? Type of thing, because part of it is like, are you able to stick with your original guns in these conversations? This is just an example of acting. The Career Center, we do mock interviews with the discussion part. We really don't do the mock interview with the acting because it'd be really difficult for us to achieve this, but kind of interesting just to see. We're going to see 3 parts of this. So the first is like, these are the instructions given to you, the applicant. Your apartment garage has assigned parking spots. On leaving your spot, you are observed by the garage attendant as you back into a parked car, a Porsche, knocking out its left front headlight and denting the left front fender. The garage attendant gives you the name and office number of the owner of the Porsche, telling you that he is calling ahead to the car owner, Richard. The garage attendant tells you that Richard is expecting your visit. Enter Richard's office and begin your conversation with him. And you have 2 minutes to take notes, however that could be helpful for you here. But the actor in the room who you're meeting with, these are the instructions that he or she was given. You are Richard and have just been told by the parking garage attendant that your car has been hit while parked in the garage. You are very angry about the damage to your brand new Porsche, which you just bought 4 weeks ago. In addition, you were planning to leave straight from work to pick up your family for the long drive to your beach cottage, but now will not feel safe driving to the beach after dark. Voice these concerns angrily. Accuse the applicant of being a terrible driver and an incompetent idiot. Raise threats of causing problems with the applicant's insurance company, getting the police involved, and starting legal action. Give the applicant opportunities to calm you down and reason with you, but under no circumstances should you act reassured or comforted. So of course your job as the applicant is quite difficult. But here's what the assessor is looking for. Did the applicant maintain eye contact and listen well? Did the applicant agree with your concerns within limits? Did the applicant acknowledge the error? Did the applicant remain calm in the face of your anger? Did the applicant sympathize with your predicament? The reason I like showing these 3 slides is because it gives you some insight into the fact that you may have some uncomfortable MMIs. Who's to say? Some of the vignettes or the scenarios could be uncomfortable, but stay calm, assume good intent, have a smile on your face, have confidence, be reasonable, and understand too that the customer is right to an extent, but you also should have reason be the primary thing that you're leading with in these different scenarios. General tips for the MMI is synthesize your information, but you don't need to then summarize. And by that, I really am only saying, I want you to whenever you're speaking, to have a reason to say what you're saying. Like, don't just speak to fill space. Weigh both sides. Review ethical cases in advance. This is great to do in advance of an MMI, is to just understand what some different ethical scenarios are. It doesn't have to be specific to your profession. So if you have a dental MMI coming up, you might have a lot more resources to look at medical scenarios. That's okay. It's still giving you a lot of practice thinking about ethical scenarios. Take the opportunity to express empathy. That's going to be a key piece of a lot of the different vignettes that you're shown. Include appropriate caveats. Think of exceptions. Again, avoid red flags. Show some personality and roll with the punches. Again, not everyone's going to be successful for every MMI. That's just the way that they're written. We have resources written here. There are some peer advice. There are sample ethical cases that you can look at. There are practice tests both for the CASPER and for the MMI, and then also advice written by professionals for the MMI and for the CASPER. This will all be on Blue Line. Again, my name is Raven Ortolan-Wiesman, and I'm with the Career Center. Anyone in the Career Center would be happy to meet with you to discuss how interview prep might be specific to you, or conduct a mock interview if that's what you're interested in. I know you have a lot of fun ahead of you. I know this is a long video, but hey, you can pause it and fast forwarded. Of course, I probably should have said that at the beginning, but hopefully you did that. I do hope that this presentation can be a resource for you in the future, and I just wish you all the best.